Hello, everybody. We'll get started. I'm sure more people will be joining us as we go. I'm going to be sharing some slides on here. So I'll do some quick introductions from the NELP team here first. So I'm Simon Armour. I'm one of the researchers, particularly leading on the configurational comparative analysis. Shall we just do a quick round? Katie, do you want to?
So yes, just to introduce myself, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Katie Shern. I work at Sheffield Hallam University, and I lead the consortium of partners that do the National Evaluation and Learning Partnership. If we have Amy as well.
Morning everyone. Hi, I'm Amy, work for NELP along with the KTN team, and my role in particular has been around player support, so supporting the cohorts and working with Yorkshire and Humber as well as the research. So nice to see you all.
Okay. And Linda.
Morning everybody, my name's Linda. You might have seen me on a few of other meetings and events run by NELP. So I'm here to offer a bit of tech support and meeting support this morning. Nice to see you all.
Okay, so this is just a quick overview of the session today and what we're going to be covering. So we're going to have a chance just to do some quick introductions shortly in some breakout rooms. Then we're going to talk about the work that we've done and how we've and some of those findings that have come out from in terms of the overall picture of how the place work is developing and how systems are becoming more mature and the extent to which that's happening. And we'll have a chance for some reflections and questions then. We'll have a little break around about 11ish, and then we're going to go into a little bit more depth, talking about the explanations of why those changes are taking place, and giving that opportunity for people to talk a little bit about their own experiences and understandings, and then obviously we'll invite some feedback from that as well. So we're hoping to have some really good discussions this morning.
I'll unmute myself. I'm back. As we go through this next few slides, then we're actually, as Simon introduced, going to give you a flavour of some of the overall maturity that we found from our evaluation findings over the last year. And so I'm actually going to present, quite unlike our normal seminars, I'm going to present our more like chart-based findings. So sometimes people don't get on with those kind of that kind of data. So just let me know if it's not making sense as we go through. And Amy will pick up any questions in the chat. So Simon, if we can move on to the next slide, please. What I just wanted to really remind everybody is when NELP are presenting evaluation findings, where is that coming from? So what data are we referring to? So as you all know, in your local places, you're all doing different things, and increasingly you've all got your evaluation exercises going on locally to look at the things that really matter to your local place partnerships. So if you can just click on, please, for me, Simon, just to illustrate that side of the diagram. So this diagram shows that local action determined by your place partnerships and your partners, and then evaluation that corresponds to that and gives you insight on the things that matter to you. But then what happens is you share your evaluation findings with us in two ways. One is through the system maturity survey, for those of you that are taking part in that and the submissions. And I know some of you will be thinking about that coming up in October. And the second way in which you share your findings with us is through your evaluation and learning submissions, which are your open reports that give us those explanations of change, these realist explanations of change. And then what we do at NELP is we take all of that data and we do an academic thing called synthesizing it, which basically means putting it all together and looking at what patterns emerge, what kind of data matches up with some parts of the data and what matches up with other parts of the data, and what is actually quite individual to that local place. I won't go into the detail of that, but bear in mind that we take all of that in and we're looking for those patterns, and that's what we then end up presenting back to you. And the cycle continues, where we then offer opportunities for people to work with us and think about what that data means. And this learning seminar is one of those examples, and sometimes we do those face to face. And the idea is hopefully this insight, these patterns give you information, evidence, and sometimes support, or sometimes inspiration to then be able to ideally and hopefully use that in your local places to keep on thinking about what's the best way forward. So I think that last animation, Simon, should bring that together. So that's how this whole process works together. So I'll just come on and say, you know, what actual quantity of data are we working with? So on the next slide, for those of you that have been in our previous learning seminars, you know that we've been working with 47 cases that submitted system maturity assessments last autumn, and we also gathered lots of rich information from you through moderation meetings, and also our sense-making meetings in person in those workshops in the spring. And we also combine that with data from publicly available data sources. And then moving on, Simon, to the next one. And we also, in this seminar, we're bringing also our findings from 56 submissions in total, 20 submissions from autumn last wave, and 36 submissions from the spring wave. So hopefully that just gives you a flavour of where is all this information coming from. Also, it will probably illuminate to you that we've got lots more data than we can share in just an hour or a couple of hours today. And so as we're going through this, if other questions come to your mind as to it would be really interesting to know more about that, do think about that as well. Please let us know, because we can do some extra analyses over the coming weeks and months to inform you as you go forward with your approaches. So thank you, Simon. I think I've explained that really in the last couple of slides. So if we just move on to the next one. Fab. So you will have seen, well, actually you might not have seen, so it's worth just going back over this just to help you situate the findings that we're going to share today. So what we are all recognising is that we have a common set of long-term outcomes that we are collectively and individually and in your place partnerships and nationally trying to achieve, as well as probably quite a lot of other local outcomes that are of interest to you. But from the point of view of Sport England and from the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, these are trying to increase activity, decrease inactivity, narrow inequality, and provide positive experiences for children and young people. But we all know that those outcomes are not solely within our control, and there are lots of other factors that can influence those changes. And just as an example that we're all familiar with, the effect of COVID-19 on people's activity levels, it's outside of our control. We can do things to mitigate for those kind of those challenges, but not necessarily alleviate them altogether. So what we're really interested in is like trends and about how these things change over time, and also build our confidence that we are working towards affecting those changes. But we're really interested in these stepping stones that we can kind of understand that might help us to contribute to those changes. So if you can just click through again, Simon, for me. To the next animation, Simon, if you will. It's not changing on my screen. I don't know if it's changing on other people's screens. There we go. So we're interested in how the context might change, how the scale of the investment you have both financially and in human terms in place-based approaches to tackle physical activity inequalities might affect change overall. But as you know, we're also really interested in how that work at a local level can mature a system so that it's working more collaboratively across sectors, it's strengthening community capacities, and it's also tackling some of those underlying root causes of physical activity in people's opportunities in everyday life. So where we really focus our efforts is on understanding these maturity conditions and changes there, but we do also track those trends over the long term as well. So hopefully people are familiar with that and the nature of this, what we're going to be discussing. So if we go on to the next slide, Simon, then I can start to give people a bit of a flavour of what we're learning. So this first slide, sorry, the formatting has just gone off a little bit for us. But what I wanted to highlight really is that if people are familiar with the conceptual model that NELP works with, and Amy's going to just put a link into the chat if she hasn't already, to kind of just draw you to a resource for that if it's not familiar to you, is that we see this work to tackle physical activity inequalities at 3 potential overlapping areas of action: sector integration of physical activity into other sectors, strengthening community and individual capacities for physical activity, and tackling structural inequalities. And what we see is that all of these areas of action, in fact, actually, I'm going to come back to this one. I think that slide is not quite right. So we'll come back to that slide in a little while, because the one that I can see on my screen is different. But the averages that we have analysed is that the maturity across those different areas of action are roughly 3.5 out of 7. And there's a strength in the community capacity, a little bit more than the others, but we'll just update that slide when we come back to it. So what does that tell us? That tells us that things are maturing in that kind of embedded, sort of establishing and emerging sense, but they haven't yet reached an embedded level of maturity. Now, if we look at the results that we've got from the System Maturity Survey across the conditions for change, and this is where we've aggregated the conditions for change, we also see that the average kind of maturity score across those conditions also spans between 3 out of 7 and 4 and a little bit out of 7. So again, reflecting that kind of emerging picture of maturity, but not yet embedded maturity. And on this slide here, we're also looking at the change between 2023, when we first collected this data in the autumn of 2023, which is on the left-hand bar of these charts, and it's in the yellowish colour, compared to 2024, which is in the teal colour on the right-hand side of each of these bars. So you can see from just looking at this that we're seeing a maturity in general year on year, but probably increasing maturity in things where a lot of you have put in the most effort. So things like capacity and capability building, in collaboration, and in leadership. So that's a positive picture in a sense that, you know, this effort is showing overall a change of maturity year on year. But actually, we also need to reflect that these efforts are at that phase of emerging and establishing and are not yet embedded in any one place. And I think just from speaking to you all over the last year, you're probably not surprised by that result, but I think it's still worth noting that is where we are at. So if we just bring that onto the next slide, Simon. Just putting that back onto our kind of overall massive theory of change, this shows where we are. This is where we are, you know, at the moment in this overall network of efforts, is just starting to see these short-term outcomes shifting a little bit. And again, if you click on for me, Simon, it also highlights that because we aren't yet at that embedded level of maturity, we wouldn't necessarily expect to see the effect of that on these longer term outcomes. So our theory is we need to really change our systems in order to create those opportunities for more people to be active in ways that they value. And we're still on that journey to maturing those systems. So we wouldn't necessarily need to or be able to link those changes yet to those long term outcomes. But that is a yet. because happily we are in our evaluation and learning submissions seeing some green shoots of change. And I'm just going to highlight a few of those to you now. And of course, there's absolutely loads of detail within this. So first of all, what we are seeing is some of those places that are a little bit more embedded. We're seeing the place partnerships that have been trailblazing, perhaps these new ways of working, actually now maturing into lending and receiving support by means of funding and or people from aligned efforts on tackling inequalities. So some of our mature places are not only continuing to mature around the physical activity agenda, but also more around the place agenda more generally. The next green shoot is where we've seen programme design or project design being shaped by local perspectives. And actually in some of our more embedded places, that's then translated into more regular, routine resident input into strategic planning and more equitable decision making generally beyond just the sort of project lifespan. If we move on to the next one, aligned with that, we've seen some brilliant examples of community-led projects, but actually that's then translated into again, a sort of more systematic training, mentorship, even paid roles in meaningful community contributions going forwards. And other examples of green shoots is where those regular partnership meetings that might have feel really difficult to bring together and to get people around the table in the first instances, actually having developed those networks and developed those connections, that collaboration between those organisations and those people is happening beyond the project funding. So other groups that are going for project funding to help further and continue to deepen their practice that isn't just solely reliant on the efforts of the initial partnership forming to continue that on. So I hope you agree that those are some, really interesting and useful sort of green shoots of change. We also have kind of more tangible outcomes in terms of, and these are just examples because the weight of information that we have is in lots of different directions. But for example, health, wellbeing and activity routinely assessed in planning and transport initiatives. Lots of examples of broader sector policy change to support physical activity. And in our spring wave, we gathered 31 examples, strong examples of the places working across the health sector. And those are just examples. So I'm sure that it's just scratching the surface of some of the changes that we've seen. We've also seen examples of resonant campaigns and initiatives reflecting local communities, with 33 strong examples of working with communities from across the network. And as we've heard in our last few seminars as well, good examples of increased footfall, people taking pride in local parks, water and open spaces that they weren't otherwise taking before. So it's just a flavour of some of those green shoots that give us a sense that we're working towards something which is really shifting systems, but also recognising that's still a lot of work to do yet. And this is the kind of green shoots which also maybe goes over the top of some of the things that haven't worked or haven't worked so well or that are still yet to emerge. I'll just take a breath there, Amy. Are there any questions or any comments or thoughts coming through in the chat yet? No?
There's nothing come through in the chat, but if anyone wants to add or speak up now, that'd be great.
That's fine. We've got a chance in a moment to really take stock and to share back as well. So if there's nothing immediately, I'll carry on. So let's think then, what is it that's actually predicting that higher overall maturity? What we've done is we've looked at those cases amongst, if you recall, there's 47 cases that submitted the system maturity survey last year, and 25 of those we can say, well, those are showing slightly higher maturity, albeit still on the road to embedded maturity. And thinking about what are the conditions, if we were going to isolate just a handful of them, what are the conditions that seem to predict that higher overall maturity? And this is where the overall maturity is over a 3.5 out of 7. And The strongest predictor of that higher overall community are those more mature community-led initiatives. The second most strong predictor of that are the organisational processes, policies, processes and structures. So just for those of you not so familiar with this jargon and terminology, what we mean by that is where within places and place partnerships, the processes for exchanging information or finances or procurement are adapting in order to make it more possible to collaborate, to involve more partners. And the third sort of strongest predictor, albeit less strong than these other two, is that collaboration effort. And that's where that's more mature, we also see higher overall maturity. So if those of you that have been with us on the previous learning seminars, this is the reason why we focus on these three areas as kind of, you know, deep dives into some of those case studies and examples from the evaluation, because those are some of the things that actually predict that higher overall maturity. So now we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at, are there any differences between the deepening place partnerships? And again, for those of you not as familiar with the Sport England terminology, they were what we used to call the local delivery pilots. And then how that compares to the, I guess, the rest of the cases that may well have been working on place-based approaches for a long time, but haven't been the local delivery pilots. And at the moment, we're calling all of those the expansion place partnership, the expansion place partnerships. So as you might expect, the deepening place partnerships, you know, potentially because of that sort of concentrated effort and injection of funding, are more mature on aggregated, you know, when we look at all of the conditions together, than the expansion place partnerships. But actually, if we look at 2023 compared to 2024, we can see that that gap is narrowing ever so slightly. So one thing that I do have to kind of caveat these results with today is that if those of you remember, we did change the system maturity tool between 2023 and 2024. So we're only looking at the comparable conditions here, but there are some reasons that could, rather than just it actually reflecting a change in maturity, it could also be a kind of research effect that shows the difference here. So I just want to caveat these results. But just to say that, you know, there is an indication that despite the sort of perhaps differences of when places have started on this journey and differing levels of investment, for example, it's in and of itself doesn't seem to be hindering maturity. And perhaps we can interpret that to be because there's a growing acknowledgement and knowledge about what place-based approaches are and might be, and that even though it's still down to each place partnership to get things off the ground and to sort of build those partnerships, and we know that that does take work and effort, there's perhaps a bit of confidence about how and why we're doing things and examples that we can draw on from the deepening place partnerships that can help inform those approaches and maybe just give us a little bit of a kickstart in some of those new places. So from all of this that we're talking about here is this element of, you know, thinking about where we are. You know, we are at that kind of emerging, establishing maturity. The expansion places are, you know, really coming on quite strongly. But we're also posing the question today, you know, what is it that's going to take us beyond these kind of establishing areas of maturity into that embedded maturity? And that's going to be one of the themes of the rest of the session. So if we can move on to the next slide, thank you, Simon, and then the one after that as well. Thank you. So what we've got here is just, again, highlighting the differences between the deepening place partnerships and the expansion place partnerships, highlighting that, again, that there is a slightly higher average in terms of maturity, and the biggest differences are around those organisational processes, capacity and capability, community-led action, and cycles of learning. And I think that's really interesting because these are things that we know take some time to embed and do require that kind of ongoing sort of work and action and sort of resilience and persistence actually within systems that might not kind of necessarily always welcome some of those changes. And so that's possibly why it just shows a bit more maturity in those places that have perhaps been working at this a little bit longer. Next slide, please, Simon. It hasn't changed on my screen. I don't know if it's gone to next plot. Oh, there we go.
Sorry, just showing on mine.
That's it. I've got it now, Simon. Thank you. So the last slide before, I think we're going to, well, there's 2 more slides and then we're going to have a moment for reflection. So do get your thinking caps on in terms of what this means to you, whether it feels familiar or whether it's surprising, and you know, and what you think it means for your place partnership. But the last couple of slides before we have that moment is, first of all, thinking about maturation over time. So again, another sort of fancy word there, but we might expect to see that the longer we are working at place partnerships, the more mature we are over time. That's a kind of, you know, kind of familiar relationship that you might expect to see. And actually, if we look at that as a linear relationship, just purely about maturity overall and the duration of the whole system approach, and if you can just click onto the next animation, please, for me, Simon, then we do see a linear relationship between time and also maturity. And there's a blue line that is going to pop up at some point. I'm not sure whether we've got a bit of a technical delay here. So as I was saying before, what we've seen is that there is a relationship, if we look at it linearly, between time spent in whole systems approaches, as you can see that sort of line there, and each of these dots represents one of the place partnerships I should highlight. But actually, it's not actually as quite as straightforward as that. And if we do, if we look at the complex pattern between time and duration, then actually it could potentially show a rise and then a potential dip. Now, I don't want that to send everybody into heart palpitations in terms of, you know, what, oh no, what does this mean? I think it's something that we wanted to share with you because we want to highlight this idea that there might be 2 phases of this work, and it's starting to emerge for us that some of the more embedded places are starting to sort of shift and adjust their strategies in order that it doesn't sort of tail off, you know, over time. And so what I wanted to just really kind of put to the group here is, you know, potentially there's 2 broad phases in place-based systemic work, and it's starting to emerge from our evaluation. The first, which many of you in the room are in, and therefore I don't want you to think too far ahead, but it's useful to be aware of, I think, is characterised by new partnerships, innovative reach and inclusion, some of these exemplar projects and initiatives that can sort of demonstrate different ways of working, and perhaps working with or winning over stakeholders that you might not have traditionally worked with. They might be in the community, or they might also be across different sectors. But actually, to really get us to that embedded phase, there might need to be, you know, a slightly different focus. And that's what we wanted to just introduce today and see how it resonates with people based on our emerging findings around, rather than just about partnerships and relationships between individuals, thinking about meaningful institutional relationships, and that by that we mean between organisations, having this kind of routine, equitable participation of community members, residents in decision making, and then really strengthening that allyship beyond the sport and physical activity sector that I know that a lot of you are working to develop in here, but actually really strengthening that allyship on tackling inequalities more generally. So there's an absolute load for us to get through there, and I'm really grateful for your concentration and attention to it. But really, what we'd like to do now is just open the floor for any reflections and discussion. And I'm happy to take any questions and comments straight away. But we do have Ross and Russ back from Stockport for us, who participated in the last seminar, and I would like to give them an opportunity also to reflect on some of what they've seen here to see whether it resonates with them too. So do feel free to jump in, anybody else, but Ross and Russ, you're welcome to kind of reflect with us based on what you've just heard this morning.
Thanks, Katie. Just my initial thoughts looking at that last slide were that where you're moving from the emerging into the embedded and that meaningful institutional relationships, I think that's really important. But I think there's two elements to that. There's building a consensus around physical activity playing a role in meeting priorities across institutions, and having it positioned within various policies and strategies within our institutions. But the challenging stage we're finding now is what that looks like in practice, in terms of how that is the ways of working within those institutions is more challenging, and changing the way of thinking and working is more challenging. So the first step will be to get them engaged and to position physical activity within their work to support their priorities. But the next stage is how they deliver that, because if they then look to deliver and embed that within traditional ways of working, it could actually set you back a little bit. So it's just something to be aware of when you get into that stage.
Thank you, Russ. I think that's really helpful. Anybody else in terms of, what you've heard? And it's been a bit of a different way of presenting the data to you, so it's, maybe not what you're expecting, but any other reflections or thoughts on what you've heard? Susie, welcome.
Hi, Katie. Yeah, I was just reflecting on where we're at the moment with different place partnership working. We've got two different kind of things going on, with one with each of the two local authority areas. So we are in very early stages of discussions around place universal offer in Shropshire. And I just think there's actually a session taking place tomorrow, and I actually think some of this is really relevant because they're at the point of at our last meeting kind of really just introing the whole discussion, and there's just so much helpful learning to help position some early decision makings about what goes into that application, and just really trying to land the concepts of the system maturity. So some of the things that you've shared around, there's certain things, there's evidence. This is the whole point. This is backed up research and evidence around the certain aspects which are likely to lead to that, further system maturity than others. And so that was all I wanted to say. I just think there's some really useful content that we can potentially use to help in some decision making, just help to try and influence some of our colleagues and so on that we're working with, other partnerships across the local authority and health and so on. So yeah, that was
great. I mean, and right at the beginning, I mean, that's our intention, as well as being able to report to Sport England and the department. Actually, for us, a kind of really key part of this is being able to provide you with evidence and examples and data that can help do all of those things: inspire, support, illuminate, find the sort of approaches locally. So I think, because we've noticed a few formatting errors on these slides as we went through that, what we'll do is we'll tidy that up, but I think we can make that available certainly to attendees. Susie, if you want it in your back pocket, or even to use some of those slides in your meeting tomorrow, and yeah, thank you for that, for sharing that. Any other thoughts or reflections? I think from our point of view, one of we wanted to check if it made sense, if it resonated with people, if there was a sense that it was either familiar or you could almost sort of see where your place was within those phases or within this work. So I'll ask that question directly. You know, is there a sense that it makes sense, or is there anybody sitting here thinking this doesn't make sense to me, or I can't see where my place fits within these phases? Should I put that back up again just so people know what we're broadly talking about?
Susan wants to come in, I think.
Oh, Susan,
Right.
welcome.
Hi. I think the bit that I always struggle with is when you're asking us to think where our place might sit in terms of, do we see it as more emerging, establishing, or embedded, is that our place, for example, for myself, is the whole of Leeds, but we're only working in some very proportionally small areas of that city. Yeah. So you could say, well, certain areas might feel like they're starting, I'm not saying they are, but they, you know, some area or some of the conditions within those areas might feel like they're shifting to being more embedded, but the things that are more about the whole city might not be. I don't know. Yeah. I suppose that's kind of always where I just get myself a bit tied in knots with the whole thing, really. Yes. So I guess Susan, that's always on my mind when we're reflecting. So just to put that over, and if anyone else has got similar thoughts, I suppose.
I can see people nodding with you there, Susan, that actually the nature of some of our analysis is at that sort of local authority level, and that sort of makes opaque a lot of that difference that you will be seeing in your local systems with certain places. And I know Russ and Ross will have talked about Brinnington, which is just one small place within Stockport, but then how, you know, work there has catalysed work in other places, and it's almost, you could look at this on different scales and the same patterns might emerge. So like, you know, you might look at your wards across Leeds and think, well, or even local areas and think, well, these ones are more embedded here, but this is like really just establishing there. And so I think we have to accept that as a limitation for us at a national level, just because of the sheer complexity of working at that local level. But I would be really interested in the next sort of cycle to see what we can do, and you know, potentially across different places at that analysis at the sort of more ward level, and how we could support you to perhaps use some of our tools, but to do that within a bit more of a granular way. So I absolutely see your point and recognise that this is a kind of averaging effect, which can gloss over some of those differences. But let's think really, you know, think together about how can we help you to reflect that locally, what the picture might look like, while still being able to contribute to the national picture. Sorry, I'm a bit waffled there, but I suppose I'm hearing you, and I acknowledge, you know, and acknowledge their limitations at our level, but can we think about how these patterns might translate to a more sort of hyperlocal geographic pattern potentially? Russ, do you want to respond to Susan there?
Yeah, thanks. Just to say, I totally agree. It's a challenge. So the way we've looked at it in Stockport is to look at how this work is maturing and becoming embedded with the particular strand of work that this is, i.e. the place partner local pilot work. So looking at it on that level, but then looking at what impact is that level of progression and maturity. How's that impacting the wider strategic work around physical activity across the borough? So we look at this particular piece of work as being our kind of action research strand of the wider strategic work, and how that's feeding, the learning from this is feeding into that wider maturity picture. And that's how we're interpreting the widening. So in terms of embedding, we're looking at how do we develop the work that we've already done in the places we've already done it, i.e. Brinnington. But our widening work is how do we build that across the borough more generally in the broader strategic work. So looking at it at two levels has helped us.
Thank you, Russ. I can see Susan nodding. Yeah. Oh, here we go. Right, Ross, then Fareed, then Corey. Ross.
Thank you. I just got in there. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I guess just to add to what Russ has said, because I was sort of thinking along the same lines and nodding as well to sort of what you raised there, because we've really benefited from the granular level working that has allowed us to probably mature some of our thinking and actually kind of give that evidence to show that, you know, when I think, Katie, when you were showing the sort of the roots and, you know, how that's, you know, emerging with the green shoots, I thought that was a good analogy around exactly how that's benefited us to have conversations with people at varying sort of levels. So, you know, some of the things that Russ touched on are the more sort of strategic side of things, but actually, a lot of that has to emerge from what you do on the local sort of granular level. So that has allowed us to add context and translate some of our more kind of, I don't like to say success, but some of the developments that have happened that have been really positive. It's just given us a lot more sort of context around, like, you know, this work. So kind of merging in this angle of, you know, the evaluation strand that we're talking about here, the more strategic outcomes and the governance that is there for the Stockport, you know, borough-wide level, but then actually having that evidence there on a very sort of hyper-localized level. I feel like those three strands in particular have just given so much strength to, you know, where you can talk about sort of maturity and you can bring people on this journey with you. So I just wanted to make sure that side of it was, you know, highlighted as being really important and key, you know, for this to drive forward.
Thank you, Ross. And that is helpful. And I think what I know about the work in Stockport and other places as well. And in fact, Amy's going to talk through an example in some detail after our break as well. But it's having those that work at those different levels, but it's the intentional connection of it that is the way in which you can really drive that forward. So and I know that you know, the connection between your leaders within Stockport has been able to allow you to have those kind of intentional connections. Fareed, do come in now, please.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. It's just I have two questions. One of which is related to the maturity matrix and how partners evaluate their maturity in their systems. So the sample size of 56, if I'm not wrong, which is good to drive like a conclusion of what's actually happening in these places. But there is part of the analysis which is related to the evidences, and there's like if there's like a common theme between all the places where they made like an approach, a specific approach, where it worked in all the places who are mature in a certain level above 3.5. And the second question, which is related to the linear graphs that you showed us earlier, like how did you define the time variable in that linear graph?
So that was defined. We had a question within our survey that asked how long people felt their systemic place-based approach had been in duration for. So it was filled in by the partnerships themselves. And in actual fact, some of you might assume that the longest running partnerships are all the deepening place partnerships, but that's not necessarily the case, because some of the cases that we work with have been doing this work for a long time, albeit not funded in the same way by Sport England. So it was just a question in the survey that asked how long they've been running from, and it was self-identified by the partnerships themselves. The first question, did you ask what is it that's common, if anything, about those more mature places, Fareed?
If there's like a common theme of mature places which they are about 3.5 with like an evidence most of them did in order to be above 3.5?
Yeah, so just going to jump back to the slide. Amy's put the information in the chat there. So obviously this belies a lot of detail that sits behind it. But what we saw when we looked at our modelling is where there are more immature communities, so that like higher maturity on the community-led initiatives and higher maturity on the organisational processes and higher maturity on the collaboration was where we also had that higher overall maturity. And so it's not to say that the other conditions aren't important or don't feed into these ones, as we all know it's very interrelated. And again, Amy's going to take us through that after the break. Well, between Simon, Amy and myself, we're going to go through that after the break. But this is where we see that where people have tipped over into, let's say, the higher levels of the established conditions or embedded conditions for those things, then we also see that higher level of maturity. So it's to give you the detail of specifically what they're doing is probably beyond what I can offer right now, Farid, because of the time. And also, as you'll probably be aware, is they're not all routinely doing exactly the same thing, but like that's the pattern that's emerging, that is kind of tipping over towards higher levels of maturity overall. Does that make sense?
Yeah, actually, I know that's the level of details to go through the evidence is a bit deep, and that's why I was a bit curious if this information just was collected, just to see if there's like a common, yeah.
Yeah, it's collected, and our way of sharing that has been in some of these learning seminars thus far. So what we've tried to do is to give explanations of change, which talk really about what kind of things are coming together to create, more embedded community-led initiatives. If you recall from Jan's feedback from Bradford, the process that they went through there, and collaboration, and Jodie's feedback from Doncaster in terms of what they're doing there to kind of build that collaborative partnership. So we have some detailed and deep examples in those learning seminars, but they're examples that bring to life the analysis that we've done, which are represented in those explanations of change. So I think in order to be able to use the information, it's about trying to take those explanations of change and think, like, if I'm going to put that in my place, what would that look like for us? And use the examples from, say, Bradford, Doncaster, etc., to help provide inspiration of what might be done, but not necessarily lift and shift those exact things, because it sort of needs to be worked out locally. Does that help?
Yeah, that definitely helps. Thank you, Katie.
No problem at all. Thank you for the question, because it helps us to explain the process a bit more. Corey, you had your hand up, but it's gone down again. Was there anything else that you wanted to add?
To be honest, not really. It was more just to kind of, I think, echo what Ross and Susie have already said, and just it's just been really helpful actually, and I think it is going to be used, or we can use it as evidence. So next week we're bringing our partners together to discuss the 9 conditions. Then we're trying to get the system maturity matrix completed by the end of September and submit in October. So I think it's just quite key to show them the ingredients as such that work together in a way to make systems as mature as possible, because currently right now I definitely think a challenge is handing over that trust to have full community led, not necessarily just initiatives, but have that lead for community, and that definitely is not there yet at the moment. But I mean, we're only in a development phase, so we're still very early days. But yeah, it's just interesting to see as well just the small amounts of change that take over such a long time. So it kind of helps me feel a little bit less stressed, if you know what I mean. Just a little bit like, oh, actually, this is going to take some time to see some change, and where we've been in this, for 8 months. And I'm like, what's happening? There is a lot of stuff going on, but real significant change is going to take time. So it's more just me mulling it over. But yeah, I think Ross and Susie covered a lot of it anyway, and it's just been really, really helpful on reflection. So thank you.
Thank you, Corey. And actually, honestly, we could have given you a 5 for that, because what you've just said around how do we really kind of, if community-led initiatives are really important, what we're highlighting in the second half of this seminar is like actually some of where things might be getting a bit stuck and then having an opportunity to talk about that with colleagues after the break. So thanks for setting that up beautifully, Corey. We will take a break now. 5 minutes, I think. Oh, hang on, I'm the person sharing the slides now, aren't I? So 5 minutes to just grab try to move, have a cup of tea, and then come back to the seminar. I've gone over a bit now, so that 7 minutes past 11. What we will be talking about, 8 minutes past 11. Thanks, Amy. You knew I was going to carry on talking. What we will be talking about is again going into these kind of explanations of change in a bit more detail to help bring that to life. So corresponding to what Fareed and Corey were mentioning there. And then what we know that you really enjoy is that time together to kind of mull it over, think it through, share examples, share frustrations. So we've got a good chunk for breakout sessions as well. Okay, so what we're going to cover now is we're going to just really sort of dive in a bit more into the conditions and the connections between them. And it's going to be a bit of a double act, and in fact a triple act between myself and Simon and Amy. So do bear with us as we sort of, you hear our different voices. Of course, we are all from the NELP team, but I just want to really reiterate that we're drawing on the evaluation data that has been provided by a whole host of you over the last 12 months. So please do see that as sharing your lessons and learning as well. Okay, so I'll just go back to full screen and I'll hand over in a moment to Simon. Off you go, Simon.
Okay, thanks, Katie. Welcome back, everyone. Just we thought we'd begin by sharing what happened when we thought about how these different models that we've looked at in sense-making workshops, which took place earlier in the year, how do they relate to each other? So we'd identify these 4 outcomes, which are the dark blue boxes there, and we'd sort of ask the question of which conditions tend to predict these outcomes. But then we thought, well, it was interesting that we noticed that these outcomes also relate to each other. So we wanted to particularly sort of highlight these ones which are emerging from all those different configurational models that have been putting together. So if we start with 7B, sort of out on the right hand side there, the dark blue one, just thinking about that, you know, that's in many ways one of the outcomes that we want to achieve. We want to see that real change on the ground in communities where people are changing the way they feel and think about physical activity and getting more involved and so on. And so, you know, in terms of achieving that, we found that supported community-led initiatives was the biggest predictor of that. But it also needed that community leadership and voice. It seems to make a big difference as well. So then you sort of go back and say, well, what enabled that supported community-led initiatives? You know, and that was very much sort of showing up those foundational conditions, as we call them. So, you know, capturing that insight and understanding of community perspectives, building that capacity within the voluntary sector, and also changing those processes to enable these more place-based systemic ways of working. And that in itself was strongly associated with data capture. So there's a kind of central place then for condition 2A, as we call it, the processes, which itself then is the biggest predictor of whether or not you have good collaboration within the sector and across sectors. 4A is an outcome. And for that one, it did seem that strategic leadership was quite important too. So all these different conditions kind of interact with each other, but it does sort of suggest, and obviously we haven't included every single potential configuration because there's thousands of those, but those ones that came out quite strongly when we looked at different, you know, we experimented with different ways of looking at the data. These models came out as quite strong patterns, and that's why we thought they were worth sharing. Basically, we've got that quite a strong suggestion that these conditions are very much interacting and quite important to bringing about those changes. And interestingly, in the workshop, that's two-way relationship between the processes and the support of community-led initiatives came out quite strongly. Not just that you need to put the processes in place first, but if you have got those strong community-led initiatives, that seems to have a bearing on the increasing maturity in terms of your processes and systems and so on. So Amy's going to talk in a little bit more detail about what this means, what it might look like in practice.
Thanks, Simon. Yeah. So I was asked to kind of try and bring this to life with a bit of an example from a place, really, to try and show just one way that we could see this interconnection between the conditions, recognizing that if you took another place, there might be a slightly different way of kind of seeing this, but still showing that connection. So this example, with huge thanks to Hackney, is based on them. I will never tell the kind of story as well as Lola or someone from the places. This is kind of a bit of a database story, having read the report and going through and see how these can connect really. It will have a bit of linearity when I tell the story. That's more to give it a flow, but just to highlight really that when you're reading the report, you can really see how these conditions kind of reinforce and loop back around. So before I kind of go into it, Katie's going to nicely kind of click along as I go. I just wanted to, I think we've covered loads of this stuff already, but just before I go into it, just to really highlight the focus of when I was looking at the data around this, many places where we see that growing maturity, not yet embedded, but growing, is at their foundation. They seem to be trying to understand how they can create new relationships or ways of working with communities more as equal partners. And that really came across in the Hackney report. And in particular, places who, again, are looking at more mature, often take that inequalities lens. So they are looking at physical activity, but when they're working with communities and partners, that alignment around, in this case, health inequalities in particular, but actually structural inequalities really came through in that, really. And Hackney kind of describe a lot of this as trust-based collaboration. And when we as NELP look at this in the data, we kind of start to write about it as equitable or fair relationships. That's not an individual relationship. That's how communities and institutions are working together. So the other kind of key element as well is when we talk about processes a lot, and we really, as we can see here, they are fundamental to this way of working. But what we don't want to miss behind that is that we recognise that people are important in this, and people are important in changing the processes. And Katie's going to kind of slap me around the head for saying that. But so yeah, people in themselves are important. And what we've recognised from this example, we're going to even Hackney and other places, having people in roles with some capacity and some time who can take both that kind of community and systemic approach to try and actually think about what is this understanding that is driving this change in processes, seems to be quite key. So if we recognise that people and organisations locally have that knowledge and skills, how can we, I think as someone nicely put earlier, how can we shift that decision making and maybe resources to them? Okie dokie. So the Hackney example. So as you can see, their bottom left, that long-term investment in local relationships was really a key focus here. So in Hackney, the place lead, Lola, who's brilliantly talked on a lot of podcasts and a lot of these kind of seminars, she spoke about seeking to work with communities to really understand that genuine real life experience of people, and in particular those who we often don't reach. And she saw that as a foundation to the work and used it to drive the work. So if we just click on to the next one, Katie, so that should come up there. So that all of this kind of starting foundation is anchored firmly in the lives and experiences. So data was collected about physical activity. They got baseline assessments, but the insights they got were broader. So they looked really at the community experiences in Kings Park, the hyperlocal area they were working. And the focus was understanding the people that live there and the community organisations that were based there. They recognised quite early on that they felt community organisations and some of the anchors like the Pedro Club that have been in this area for a long time and really knew the area, they were best placed to gain that deeper understanding and create the initiatives. So they also wanted to understand the organisational needs as well. So yeah, what did it take? We can share this afterwards, and I've got another slide where I've kind of bullet pointed a few of what's seen from the data, maybe 3 or 4 kind of key things, but actual empathy and that genuine will to understand seemed really important. and seeing this not just as a project, but to understand the communities as a foundation to drive that change, and in particular as a leader that need to hold the line around this and to almost not be too outcomes driven and recognise that time to rebuild the relationship with communities. In this example, there was a lot of historic context around challenges with a local community working with the council, so that might have been a particular focus here, but yeah. So again, in that capacity, because it took time to reframe both with partners how we could work with communities and rebuild the relationship with communities. So that time there. So if we just click along to that, so yeah, it's lovely. So then this comes on to kind of this 3B, this VCSE capacity and capability. So alongside the relational approach of working with these organisations, they started to recognise by working with them, it went beyond delivery to look at the organisational development of some of these community organisations. And they needed a flexible approach to enable different community organisations to be involved. And through this, they got different community organisations with a different reach. So actually looking at people who not just didn't engage in physical activity, but people who maybe weren't engaged in their kind of community settings. So again, thinking about tackling some of these structural inequalities, this lens was particularly important for them. So what they did here, they co-designed and they changed the funding models with community organisations from short-term to longer-term support. A very practical example, they got people in like consultants and paid for consultants to support with governance and financial management. And what we saw is they got an outcome of the supported community-led initiatives and increased reach and deeper understanding of community needs. So just click one more, sorry for me, Katie. Yeah.
Have I done it for sustained investment in local leadership or next one?
Next one, and then one more. Sorry, just.
That's fine.
Thank you. Yeah, fab. So I'm just going to come through. So yeah, so we started to see that in a hyper-local way, kind of as Susan was saying before, we started to see these supported community-led initiatives, and there was more of a focus on sustainability around this as well. And they've got kind of lots of examples of this approach, plus the local organisations using common spaces that people use, libraries, parks, etc. And they've got many examples of where they felt this has changed these kind of the cultures for people in an area through the trusted organisations and through activation of these spaces. And then they kind of really nicely talk about, well, this is some really good hyperlocal work, but actually, how do we now think about how this could drive that place-wide learning? Just give me a second there. So this is where it's hard to talk about it in a full linear, but so we start to see kind of collaboration creeping in. So while we've got this community work going on, the team are also doing a lot of work with organisations, and that's within the council itself and other organisations, and they've created a delivery partnership network. And part of how they connected the two up, so community organisations were paid to attend this network, and the organisations were kind of live supporting this work as it went. So there was a lot of kind of collaboration ongoing through this. But I think what they kind of really highlighted in terms of the processes is they'd created this funding model, but it was the ability to be able to share this with partners and explain how, you know, the supported community-led initiatives had led to change, and sharing that learning with them, that had started to enable partners to think about how can we change processes more broadly than in Kings Park. So it's like this working across boundaries and sharing that learning seemed really important, and having that focus in the network in particular. And Hackney spoke a lot about the collaboration being this kind of partnership for change. Sorry, click along. Was it partnership engineering for change? One more, maybe. Partnerships. That's the term. Partnerships are the engines for change. That's it. Sorry, yeah. So they were saying, even though the community organisations are doing this brilliant work, it was also about sharing that resources as they went along and kind of changing that relationship with the council with these community organisations to bolster this. So we've kind of got this hyperlocal work and it's being supported. What they found was through this network and this collaborative way of working, one of the key things they spoke about was having allies and relationships at each level of particularly the council. So when we talk about leadership, not just being from the top, this seemed really important to have this understanding of people at different levels of the council. And what they started to actually do is they actually categorised some of the organisations and shared this, and they categorised them as enablers, influencers, or delivery partners, and that started to help people understand their role in supporting this community-led work. So that was really important. And then the last thing I wanted to say, really kind of feeding in that strategic leadership, is the team recognised, as we were saying before, physical activity and health inequalities were intrinsically linked, and they used that as a lever for systemic change. And they spoke a lot of the time about sometimes it felt like the programme had no clear place because physical activity could almost fit in many of these things, but aligning with that priority seemed to really help. And the strategic leadership and the senior leaders in particular, to legitimise the work for them and to connect it to broader priorities, sharing this example of how they'd work in Kings Park and giving them a clear narrative of how it worked really helped them to connect it to broader priorities and embed it into other areas of governance and service delivery. So they just spoke about that kind of coherent narrative. So I'm going to stop there. I know that was quite a lot, but hopefully that kind of gives a bit of a flavour of how they, I guess, really started with these foundations of this hyperlocal work, how they changed the ways of working. And when we say ways of working, it's much deeper around not just the trust, but also the processes, who's involved in this decision making. That funding model was co-designed. It was all of them elements that changed these processes and then use that to try and influence to make this a more borough-wide change.
Thank you, Amy. That was great. Corey's got a hand up. Corey, do you want to come in for a question or
Yeah,
a
it was just to
reflection?
give context. Yeah, sorry, just to give context to what I asked in the chat. I know Simon's just responded about sending the slides, but it was more around we're at our day next week with our partners. We're providing, I say we're trying to create a document that's got examples from our own place and what we've been doing to match each condition, as I know there's stuff like that out there. So we're trying to do that. But then ironically, obviously one of them is collaboration, and yet we're treating them in silo. And this is, we're not intentionally doing that, but obviously this is then showing how they all work together. So I think it was actually really important probably to get across to our partners in some way, not just these are the ingredients for change, yes, but how do they all mix together to make a cake, essentially. That's my analogy of it. And I was trying to make notes as Amy was going by. I couldn't write as quickly as everything was being said, but it was really helpful. It would just be good if there was each example and how it worked through those, or just one or two or something, because actually we've got places that don't have any community spaces whatsoever. We literally have nothing. There are others which do, and it was just interesting to hear how different places worked differently, but still did all of these connections in place with each condition. Does that make sense? I don't know if there's any way that you're able to send like one or two, and just how they go through these stages and kind of how they got to their outcomes, because that was really good. It was just a lot that I probably won't remember all. I know we can watch back, but just something that's,
I mean, in the short term, Corey, we can provide the transcript for you so that you've got the narrative. I've just noticed that Russ has highlighted in the chat that it resonates well with Stockport. Yeah, that's true. This is not reflecting back on the earlier slides. It's like this is an ongoing picture. We are in the sort of we are here moment, you know, so it's not to say it's done and dusted, and particularly that kind of spread. And the little bits that I know about Stockport, I think, you know, you probably could have changed some of the words and replaced it with Stockport, some of the Hackney words, and replaced it with Stockport there, and some of the local areas in Stockport, and it would have read like a sort of similar-ish story. I'm looking at Ross to see whether he's going to thumbs me up there or something different to say. I'm also reflecting on some of the other deepening place partnerships perhaps started a bit more with that kind of sector level collaboration and less with the kind of community engagement element, and might have seen a story that worked similarly but in a different order, as it were, you know, and that actually to really embed the collaborations, you know, required this kind of emphasis and impetus from communities, because when organisations recognise that they are working to support communities, it's easy for them to see that actually they can't do it on their own, they need to collaborate. And so it, you know, it can, the story can be different, but it can pick up on the similar bits but in a different order. So that is that's useful that you found that useful. As you know, we're always trying to find different ways to be able to share this data because the bulk of it is very weighty and hard for people to get through. So if a few of these narratives are appealing, then we can also reach out to some of our places that have the really detailed reports to see if that's something we can sort of provide on an ongoing basis as well. Is that okay?
Yeah, no, that's fine. It just kind of sparked a little thought in me that actually, although we're presenting them as individual kind of conditions, actually you don't just change one condition then change the next one. They all need to work together, so you have to change them all not in one go essentially, but you know, without, you can't just say, oh yeah, this is going to work now because we're now more collaborative, or no, because you've still got all the other conditions. So
I think
my brain's just going on one minute, but that was really helpful to actually see in process how they all work together. And I think it's something which we probably need to share. So I'll speak to others about it and see if we can deliver something like that next week, just something similar to get them all in one place. I don't know how, and like I said, we're so early on still in this stage, as you know, Katie, but yeah, I think it's something to work towards moving forwards, how they actually merge in practice and how that looks in application.
I think that's right. And I think it's not to overwhelm, it's trying to see if we can see any sequencing in these pathways to impact. And so, yes, we've reason to believe they all have a role. It feels like there's some emerging patterns about certain things that are worth that effort early doors to be able to facilitate and precipitate some of the other things that are moving. We have 2 or 3 more slides, and then we've got a good 20-minute slot for discussion. So again, just start thinking about sharing reflections or comments or questions in breakout groups in a moment. The one element I just wanted to return to just briefly is in terms of everyone's favourite condition, the organisational processes. It's my favourite condition, but I know it's not the one that everybody else kind of maybe jumps to. Is these kind of, I guess, really annoying backroom, behind the scenes, administrative and legal and financial processes that are not necessarily designed to allow you to work in a place-based systemic way. And yet we are now seeing places that are redesigning these, that are developing new processes, that are, really kind of establishing new ways of working. And that the interesting thing is that the only thing I wanted to really highlight here is that we've seen lots of examples of things that have worked on a project by project basis, but we were interested in what actually helps embed some of these processes beyond just the sort of Sport England investment or the projects. And that's, although it's not one of the strongest predictors, where we're seeing greater maturity in these facilitative processes is where there is also work going on in your local place that is about a broader emphasis on, as Amy mentioned, tackling health inequalities, or as Russ has shared before, about a kind of one Stockport approach to kind of really sort of put residents first. So whilst you can't magic that out of nowhere if it doesn't exist in your place, if there are initiatives going on that are working with the same kind of audiences, or trying to kind of work in a different way, or try to reach for those equitable relationships, I think what we're really encouraging is finding ways to kind of work alongside those people, work with those people, and lend your efforts and reciprocally with them, because that feels like that's what's perhaps needed to kind of get some of these embedded processes in the longer, more meaningful, more sustainable approaches. So I won't dwell on that, but I just sort of throw that into the mix for the discussion. And I think, Amy, we've probably covered this already. So just rather than throw more information at people at this point, again, you'll have the slides, you can read through this. My call is to take us into the breakout rooms now to have some sort of deeper discussions. So, one of the things that we wanted to kind of put to the group is that we often say in here that it's beneficial to share power with communities and create community leadership. What we're recognizing in our data is that this is something that is recognized, but people are finding, you know, perhaps sort of sticking, a bit sticky to actually really genuinely do that in a meaningful way. So one of the questions we wanted to pose to our audience is like, well, what might we do to share power for community leadership more routinely, sustainably, and to kind of acknowledge and recognise what's standing in the way, and do a bit of collective problem solving. I actually feel like you may have other questions and things that you want to share as well. So if this question doesn't work for you, that's fine. Just decide as a group. But Linda's going to put you into breakouts now for a little bit more deeper reflection with your colleagues. We'll come back again at 10 to 12 for just a bit of wrap up and evaluation. So Linda, if that's okay to set those groups up now, that'd be fantastic. I don't know, was it a positive, difficult, interesting conversation? Any reflections from your breakouts? Thank you, Hunter. This is a routine that we have.
Yeah, I just wanted to come in. I was with Rachel from TAF and Ross from Stockport, and it was a really nice conversation because I kind of shared quite a raw and situation that we're sort of in the midst of right now as an active partnership, and yeah, it was reassuring because they could kind of see that like there is that difficulty, but it is just how we kind of go forward with it. So we like learn from the situation, and like I've said how, you know, because I sit at the center of things as like impact and insight, you know, I'm wanting to bring up with management to be like, I feel like you're not seeing the severity of this and like what it could mean, and how we really do actually need to reflect on what's happened. So no, it was just really nice to then get some reassurance that stuff does go wrong and it will go wrong, but it is how you kind of reflect and challenge the sort of those people that are going to be in the decision seats, so that hopefully we won't get it again.
Thank you for sharing that in this group as well, Hunter. That's so important, and it's really it just makes me remember about the sort of personal resilience that, you know, individuals and groups and teams sometimes need to have, you know, because things don't always run smoothly, do they? And, you know, and actually it does take some repeated efforts and sometimes change of direction. And then sometimes something, you know, almost unexpected can really create those changes that mean you're on a different platform moving forward. So thank you for sharing it. And it is really, we're really conscious actually of how we can more routinely share the things that don't go so well, in order to do more of that collective problem solving without inadvertently making things worse for partnerships and relationships, and, you know, people sharing things that that, you know, maybe might be a bit sensitive. So thank you very much, and also for Ross and for Rachel to support you in that as well. Any other reflections or thoughts or comments from other groups? Thank you, Susie.
Yeah, we talked about a few things, but I think one of the common themes was just, it's great the wealth of information, analysis, and, you know, resources being provided through NELP and other Sport England insight and data and so on. But it is overwhelming was a common theme, and having the capacity to be able to not just be at these webinars, and probably nobody can make it all of them, but then, you know, going back to 50 other different things to do, you know, so it's just thinking about, and I suppose it's for all of us to reflect on, giving you feedback as well, because it is all great about what, you know, which bits and how we use it. Because although our places, obviously we're all unique and every place is unique, I also believe that there's more commonality than there is difference in what we're trying to do across the country. So it's just trying to work through not feeling overwhelmed and just being able to have the access to the right kind of resources to pick and choose from that kind of array of information and analysis that you're providing. But and then obviously there's some comfort in knowing that we all feel a little bit overwhelmed by that volume, I suppose, and that's the point of the breakouts as well, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. If we just put into the chat the Padlet, which is a more formalised way of being able to receive that feedback, and if you do need to, you know, if you can just sort of spend some time just to kind of give us again, you know, that feedback on like what does resonate, what does work, what would you want in different formats. Because you're right, Susie, it's quite difficult for us also because we've got lots of different audiences too. So, you know, and also only limited resource with regards to actually being able to produce output. So any kind of direction of what's really helpful would be really, really super helpful. So that's gone in the chat there, but I just do want to hear from Claire as well. Is it on a similar vein, Claire, or is there?
Oh no, it's okay. It's fine. It was going back to the question actually in the breakout.
Yeah.
So
yes, please.
No, I was just saying because I'm quite new to this process in Wakefield, but I think in terms of sort of the sharing of leadership and that, I mean, the word power is quite interesting. I'm sure we could talk about that for an hour anyway, but it feels it's very much about trust, isn't it? And it takes time. So it's about understanding skills and capacity and capability, all those things we've talked about. And also, I think we mentioned a couple of times, sometimes it's not the ones that shout the loudest that actually have the leadership capabilities and capacity. And that again takes time, doesn't it, to work out that sort of trust. So and that understanding. So yeah, it's just fascinating going through the process really. And yeah, we're the voluntary sector, so it's interesting seeing it from that side as well. So
Claire, great, because Sarah encouraged you to come along. The one of the things that I hope what we're helping to demonstrate is actually the sort of whilst there are different routes through this, in the break, we were talking about some of the other stories that other deepening partners might tell, which may have a different kind of starting point, different flavour. Our modelling is showing that real importance of the kind of community leadership. And we know from repeated evidence from everywhere that does take that time. And so one of the things that I think, at the very least, we're hoping to demonstrate with this work is to protect that space and protect that time. Because you can't just magic it from nowhere. It doesn't just happen. And you have to be so careful. Like, of course, we know that people working through like locally trusted organisations, but you have to be so careful that that's not just extracting contacts and, you know. So thank you for that reflection, and thank you for joining us, particularly coming from a sort of different vantage point as well. But it's one of the things that we're hoping that with that modelling, it does actually really kind of almost protect that space in order that this doesn't really go anywhere unless we've got that as a fundamental core part of it.
Like others have said, it's quite complicated, but now you get your head around it, I can see how it all works and the power of it. It's fascinating.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you. Right, so I'll be quiet now for the next couple of minutes and give you just a moment to reflect on that Padlet. The Padlet does stay open, and you can come back to it if you've got other things to jump to. As I say, I know that we've taken that 2 hours of your time already, but I really, really value these conversations and these discussions with you, because you know, we are here to help serve you as well as us being able to gather evidence and evaluation to feed on to other interested parties. So thanks for your engagement over the last few seminars. We know that there's a busy period of reporting coming up. We're here to help. So if questions come up, or if you do get stuck on anything, please just reach out to one of us, your lead contact, or just the NELP inbox, and we'll do what we can to support you. But just on behalf of myself, of Simon, Linda, Amy, the rest of the NELP team, just want to say thank you so much for coming. Also to Ross and Russ for being our kind of key reflectors here or there, but you know, all the questions as always from the floor, really helpful. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thanks everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.